What's up, YouTube fam? Welcome to a little different departure certainly from our normal fare of either podcasting or limited gameplay. We're going to be talking mostly about Arena Championship 5 from the constructed portion. I'm very, very excited to be joined here live on stream and on YouTube by Arena Champs runner-up, future Worlds competitor, and I'm happy to say my testing teammate, Ryan Condon. Ryan, how are you, bud?
I'm doing good. Yeah, still kind of riding the high from last weekend. It's been crazy.
As well you should. As well you should. Yeah, super awesome showing for you. Super awesome showing for our elephant friend Quintorius. We'll get into that a little bit later. So I think we'll briefly, and certainly I'll peel back the curtain, and for folks who are enjoy this live, enjoy this on YouTube, let us know, and please let Ryan know doubly, because we actually recorded this. We had a great 90-minute conversation on Monday that I botched, making a stupid tech error. So Ryan is graciously letting me re-rack this. I think it'll be great. It was great on Monday. I'm sure if we even do a fraction of the quality of what it was then, that y'all are in for a real treat. So I'm gonna just sort of discuss a brief, because I haven't really been able to do this in depth at all anywhere. Certainly haven't done it on the podcast. Just do a brief sort of recap of my process for the tournament. And then I'm mostly going to let Ryan take the reins here. So first things first is I had come off of PT Murders of Karlov Manor. Certainly did not have success there in the constructed portion. Had sleeved up red black mid range, which is now really kind of a defunct deck thanks to Vamps existing. So I had some sort of personal thoughts, but I was basically I had a month to prepare. Had teamed up with Ryan and a handful of other. It's sort of a scrappy crew. With Raph Levy in the mix, but then a bunch of other, mostly I think limited specialists, sort of blind leading the blind, helping us out with trying to figure out what to do for constructed. But I had personally decided I wanted to, one was basically like baseline, if I'm going to play Phoenix because Phoenix is the best deck. I have to find a reason not to do that. And I want to play a deck that does its thing and not a deck that is trying to disrupt another deck. So I was mostly not allowing myself to play Thoughtseize or Counterspell decks. So that left Phoenix and Amalia combo largely at the forefront. You can sort of see those are, you can see Phoenix is on my screen. I have Amalia here as well. And we'll look at that. And Phoenix is what I had mostly focused on, and we can dive into that to start. And I had sort of done my due diligence a lot for the PT leading up to it, messing with, all of the whatever. If you think there's about a dozen decks that are potentially viable, there's certainly probably more in Pioneer, but playing at least, 10 matches with those, trying to figure it out. And I had a big journey with Phoenix, from not understanding it to getting beat by Autumn Burchett a ton with it, to then kind of, I think, by proxy of watching them pilot the deck, figure out how to do it myself. And I felt pretty comfortable with the deck. The big difference, and we won't get into this too much, the big difference, and we can chat about this, Ryan, you can chime in whenever, but the big difference that, there's some small differences between Explorer and Pioneer. The biggest difference is that Hidden Strings, which is a key piece for Lotus Field combo, is not on Explorer. So try as some folks on the ladder might, Lotus Field combo is not a deck in Explorer. The other big difference for Phoenix is that the Temporal Trespass, the Time Walk combo finish for the deck that it sometimes has, does not exist on Arena. So there's these, there's some slots, most slots in the deck people are pretty in agreement upon. You've got your 12 cantrips, you've got whatever mix of your 8 burn spells you're going to do, 4 shredders, 4 pranksters, 4 phoenix, 4 crews. And then I would say probably at least 1 to 2 spell pierces is undisputed at this point. And so that leaves you with about 3-4 spots, basically 3 spots. Do you want to play this borrower? Is this borrower something else? And then you usually have 1 iteration and 1 temporal trespass, but you don't do that on Arena. And so trying to figure out what those 2 slots are in the deck is a little bit up for grabs. And I had been scrolling through Pioneer lists on Goldfish and found a 5-0 list from Pioneer on Magic Online that didn't have the temporal trespass combo and instead had 2 copies of Prophet's Eidetic Memory, which is this 1 blue enchantment. When it ETBs, you draw a card. At the beginning of combat on your turn, if you've drawn more than 1 card, you put X plus +1 counters on target creature you control, where X is the number of cards you've drawn this turn -1. And I was sort of like, oh, that seems like a meme. Like you usually don't want like if you're non like you want very few non-spell non-creatures in the deck, if any, because that's cards that Free the Fae can't put into your hand. But the more I thought about eidetic memory and how it worked is that it really one of the things that this deck can do is it really can run out of gas. You know, if they're exiling a Phoenix or two, if they kill your Shredders early, you spin your wheels, you draw a lot of cards, but you may not be able to pressure effectively enough. And something that Prop's Eidetic Memory does is turns your Picklock Pranksters into real threats. And so I had a lot of success with this version of the list. I know Ryan toyed around with this. A lot of people on our testing team played some number of matches with the deck, and it seemed like if someone was going to play Phoenix and Explorer, Eidetic Memory, I think, is a real contender for what the two slots, those sort of two flex slots are going to be. And I had prepped this all. I was ready. I had done a ton of matches with this deck. I had a sideboard map. I was all good. And then we had a Wednesday meeting scheduled, the Wednesday before the Monday of deck submission, a meeting scheduled for all of us to sort of get on a call, sort of chat about where we were at. And Ryan had a very firm hand of saying, if I could force you all to register Quint, I would. And so that's where I will leave. I'll leave that, and maybe we'll sort of Christopher Nolan rewind a bit for Ryan's story here, and then we'll lead up to that testing meeting. So Ryan, take it away here.
Yeah, and get into it. It might be kind of a long story, but I'll try to.
That's what we're here for. That's what we're here for.
Yeah, for what it's worth, also, like, just quick note, great job, Ethan, finding this Phoenix list. We were all really excited about it when we found it, and we still think that it might have been the correct Phoenix list for people to bring. We are not by any means experts, and we'll get into that, I'm sure. Like, gameplay with Phoenix is really difficult, so we could totally be wrong about that, but we thought it gave you a lot more game against the Archfiend lists for sure. You can build a big flyer. It's better against Quint, we think, because it just pressures them faster.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I was like, even in that last week of testing, Ethan said, I was like, if I could force everyone to play Discover, I would. I was also saying, I think at the time, I think Proft Phoenix is a very, very valid choice and can't be super wrong. We had two really good lists, I think, for this term. Three, if you include Amalia, which I think the other three teammates who ran Amalia had a really good list, probably got a little bit more unlucky in the tournament than we did in terms of their draws in Constructed. So I think overall, even for a team of mostly limited players, we prepped really well and we had some really good lists.
Yeah.
But yeah, I'll kind of start like beginning of my process, give people a little bit of a glimpse into my situation with the whole tournament. First, got to get this out of the way, and this is important context. Boo Constructed, boo, 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 tomato, tomato, coin flip ass format, don't like it, no skill whatsoever. I'm obviously being a little bit facetious here. Constructed is a very high skill format, but as a limited player, I had not genuinely played like competitive Constructed in almost 10 years before preparing for this tournament. So we were all in somewhat of a similar boat, obviously, besides Raph. I think more people had, messed around on ladder on arena, probably in standard or something beforehand, but none of us were really experienced. I was in the very lucky position of, I had actually left my job in early January. So I had about 2 months to prepare for this tournament. Partially that was intentional to give myself some time. Partially it was something I was planning to do already. But regardless, I was very fortunate to sort of have a lot of time to really, really deep dive and get myself from beginner to as close to expert as I could get by the time the tournament started. And then also just to speak to our team a little bit, because I think both of us had really, really great resources beyond just the competitors, which were, Raph, Inflamed, you, myself, Glossu, you, and Big Mitz, Keith, all of whom are great, great players, really happy to have prepped with them. We also had two really notable sort of testing contributors. Paul Green, who's a really good Constructed player. He was one of the players who was encouraging all of us to really take Phoenix very seriously. He played it at the PT, thought it was a really good choice. It turned out to be at the PT. And yeah, Paul was just super helpful throughout this process, gave us really good thoughts, was telling us in the last week to take vampires much more seriously than we had been as a team, because we were kind of disrespecting that deck a little bit, I would say. And so Paul was a huge help. And then I would not be able to do any of the things I do in Magic without the person who I call my Magic soulmate, my roommate Mora, who incredible player, qualified for the Mox Magic Online Championship Series a couple years ago, and I helped them out a little bit with the prep for that, especially in Vintage Cube Draft. Ethan, can you imagine being able to draft Vintage Cube in a high stakes like online event like this? I was so jealous.
Yeah, that's pretty sick.
But I was able to help them prepare, which was really fun. And then they turned it around and were a core member of our testing team for this tournament. Was probably played more constructed than some of the competitors for it, more explorer definitely. And we're just like the best way I can phrase this, and the amount of thanks I give to Mora is like the night before the tournament, I, their roommate, the person who sort of like they care most about helping for this, I was like done. I was taking a break. I was like, I'm gonna recharge before tomorrow. They offered to anyone on our team to help test whatever matchup they wanted. And so they were grinding red black vamps against the Amalia players the night before the tournament, just because they were so invested.
I told you this the other day, like there was a time, because we were sort of like, we had assembled this group back in November, I want to say. Like I was still sort of, I was like, I'm like happy we have this group, but I'm really focused on the PT. I will get invested with y'all once that's over, once we have this month of March to really dive into the tournament. But there was a time where I was unclear. I knew we had like some number of people that were helping us, some number of people that were qualified, and I wasn't really clear myself because everybody seemed equally invested.
It's indistinguishable.
Yeah. So shout out truly to our two outside helpers there.
For sure. And a small shout out as well to everyone from the Cortical's Discord, limited level ups Discord, who volunteered to help us with some practice drafts in pod, which was super helpful. We needed a little bit less help in limited, but those guys were still so generous with their time, and really, really just want to emphasize, takes a village to prepare for these kinds of tournaments. And like, I'm glad we got someone in the top 8. I'm obviously a little glad it was me, but like, really it's just a crapshoot. You're throwing numbers at it and you're trying to get some member of your team in there. And I'm really proud of just the entire group for doing this process extremely well. Yeah, I would join a testing group with anyone in there again. All right, so getting a little bit back into my constructed journey, I'll try to be more brief. But beginning of January, mid-February, kind of like as you were ramping up for the PT, I was just sort of like, okay, I'm really a beginner and explorer. This is the only format I need to care about. I'm just going to try a bunch of decks, just try all the tier 1, tier 2 decks, get my hands on them, see how they feel, build some intuitions for the format. And pre-PT, the deck I had sort of ended up on as like what I felt most comfortable with was the blue-white control, not the pre-No More Lies version, actually. But it just felt really powerful, felt like it played some of the best cards in the format. I was having success on ladder with it. And then, unfortunately, post-PT, I was like, oh God, this really did not do well. And red-black Vamp seems better positioned against it than normal red-black. Obviously, Lotus played a part at the PT, and that's not on Explorer, so it's possible. But this blue-black Nassif list with Deadly Cover-Up looks really good. And blue-white just kind of fell out of the format for various reasons, Phoenix being the main one. And so post-PT, I was in a very similar sort of mental state to you in terms of thinking about Explorer, which was just like, man, Phoenix seems really good, really hard to beat, and it would be pretty tough to not register Phoenix.
I think I just want to jump in here. I just want to jump in here about like I think because to the outside eye, I want to talk about red black vamps real quick and about why I don't think, or I'll speak to myself about why it wasn't on my radar. Because I think it's a very big part of the ladder, and we faced it a lot. I faced a lot with Phoenix, faced a lot with Quint, and I'm not sure the deck can like do its thing on turn 3 some amount of the time, like do the thing where it plays Sorin on 3 and drops Vein Ripper, and that's not unbeatable, but it's quite good. It is hard to beat and can, if you don't answer it immediately, can be pretty hard to come back from. But I think part of my reasoning for not really respecting the deck was I think it was just like it was a surprise deck for the PT, did take that tournament by storm. And I think in the subsequent weeks, there's a lag of like, that's all a lot of people know. They're like, well, this list won the PT, and so I'll just play that list. And I don't think that necessarily makes it the best deck. And there's a lot more to like what matchups exist. And certainly there's a lot more to piloting that deck than like a lot of folks on the ladder do. There's a lot of noise with ladder testing as well. But so like I just felt like despite all of that, I still thought Phoenix was better. Now I think the addition of Archfiend may make that not true, but we'll get into that.
Yeah, I think the Archfiend tech, right before it was maybe coming out like in the 2 weeks before the tournament or something, actually really helped our team and at least the players who ended up on Quint, and sort of in an indirect way because that improved the Vamps Phoenix matchup. And we liked the Vamps matchup a little bit more than the Phoenix matchup as Quint.
Mm-hmm.
We liked both, but liked Vamps, I think, a little bit more comfortably. And so, yeah, I think that sort of ended up really going in our favor. You need a lot of luck in metagame developments as well, just to, have the deck you end up comfortable with be good.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, getting back into like why we went and ended up on Quint, it really was a mixture of, I did feel like the deck was well positioned, and also as a new constructed player, it was the deck that I felt like I had developed some amount of expertise and could play quite well with. Phoenix, I think, is, and we'll get into this, I think we're going to look at one of my finals matches against Tony.
Mm-hmm.
Like, there is piloting Phoenix comfortably and like competently, and you can make the deck tick. And then there's like making it sing. And those are two totally different levels. And one takes a month or two of practice, maybe. And one takes like 2 years of just playing the deck consistently throughout its lifespan in the format, knowing all the matchups, knowing your priorities, possible sideboard cards, like everything. And yeah, Phoenix is a deck where you make 1,000 micro decisions every game. And it's really, really hard to get to like mastery of that. I felt in my testing process that month before the tournament that I was able to get closer to mastery with Discover, just because I think we'll talk about this, like jokingly, we say 5. It's probably a little bit more than 5, but you make much fewer decisions in a game with Discover. Now, the deck is tricky. The decisions are difficult, and they can really punish you if you get them wrong, but there are fewer of them to make. And so if you can really nail those, the 5 decisions you get every game, you will do quite well with the deck.
And then sort of just like release yourself from the like ownership over the rest, because a lot of the deck is RNG. And as like the thing about it is like what you said before of like constructed coin flip format, like this deck just sort of like this deck is clearly that, but really the whole like all of this format is that. Like everything is
in your top 40 cards.
The margins are so close.
Yeah.
That like it just like so this I think a lot of folks, we were watching Twitch chat of coverage of the finals and seeing your deck roll through the top 8. Like, it's like people are like, oh man, how hard is it to like play this deck? And like you just play Quint and you -3 or minus Discover 4. You just click. How hard is that? And it's like, yeah, sure, but like if you play the deck, it's very easy to be like, oh man, I just missed on this thing. It's like, no, well, you sequenced your lands wrong, or you cycled the wrong thing to find lands, or you found the wrong basic or whatever. Like those small decisions, they all matter, or they're not small. Those are big decisions that all matter leading up to being able to win. So we'll chat about I'm just going to go through the mechanics of this deck real quick and then let you talk about your like journey to getting to feeling like this was the right choice. So if you didn't watch any of coverage, the way this deck works is fairly straightforward. So it's a Karuga deck because everything is expensive. The main way that you're going to win with this deck is get Quintorius into play, -3, because there are only 6 things that Quintorius can hit. They're all clones. You're going to hit a clone, ideally Spark Double first, because Spark Double doesn't care about the legendary Planeswalker life. You clone Quintorius, get the drain for 2, rinse, repeat, get another clone, drain for 4, get another clone, drain for 6, and ideally you have enough to have a deterministic win when you land a Quint. If you don't have the Quint, Carnosaur can either find clones to clone Carnosaur to eventually find Quint, do the combo, Garuda is, we'll get into this a little bit later, another way to sort of either maybe you Garuda into a spark double, get to copy another Garuda, rinse, repeat, maybe cheese a Carnosaur into play and get that combo going down the road. And then that's just really the way the deck wins. And then we'll talk about the sideboard a little bit later as well. So how did you find this deck and what made you keep coming back to it?
Yeah, so our team actually had a version of this that was almost exactly, not quite, but like pretty close to the version we ended up running in the tournament, all the way back in like January. And this was found by Inflamed, our teammate. He was having a lot of success with it right in the like region where there was a qualifier in January. I think it was like mid-month or something. He played it there, made it to day two, didn't quite get there on day two, but we all were trying this deck out a little bit and having some really strong results with it. And so it was on our radar quite early, specifically the Garuda version. We didn't really test the release to the win version ever.
No.
We were just impressed enough with the Garuda version, especially on ladder where there was just a ton of vamps and thought seizes that like I couldn't see going down to 8 threats versus 12, I think.
Well, and for a while there was this harebrained idea that we had to have this like transformational sideboard plan against Control 1 and Phoenix 2, because as we'll see, Phoenix's way to answer this deck post board is to bring in a ton of counter spells, right? It brings in Disputes, Negates, Ether Gust if you're playing it. It's got Jawari Disruption. It's got Spell Pierce. Like, so our thought was, well, what if we remove the Quint life from the deck and post board we're a Garuda companion and we don't have a deterministic combo, but our combo is undisruptible and always findable because we can always grab Garuda out of the companion zone.
And you say undestructible, just to be clear, because the cavern really does make it. You deterministically put it in your hand, and then they don't have the counter spells. Aether Gust doesn't work, so if it's uncounterable, it's gonna resolve.
Correct. So we were toying with that, and then we finally, I was very excited by that idea. Like in theory, I thought it was great. In practice, the problem was not having a combo that won the turn you did it. Meant you're either just woefully outclassed by Phoenix, or you were just a turn too slow. Like you built out a board of a bunch of dinos, and then they attacked you in the air for lethal. So it was just ended up being too slow. And then once that sort of like dream fell, I think I certainly was like, I'm not really interested in this deck anymore.
Yeah. But like that just illustrates our team was pretty locked in on this being like a real possible choice up until mid-March. So like a couple weeks out of the tournament.
Yes.
We tested a Garuda specific deck that was just a totally rebuilt different deck, but like that Garuda sideboard playing gave us that idea. We were brewing with Quint style decks for the whole time, basically.
Mm-hmm.
And really, I think we all got a little bit less excited once the Garuda plan sort of proved to not really be viable. And for me, honestly, like it was really just a decision of we're 2 or 3 weeks out of the tournament. I know I should be playing Phoenix mirrors and learning them and getting good in them because we thought that Phoenix was going to be the most popular deck in the field. I think the Archfiend tech kind of changed that, but I could easily have seen it going a different way and Phoenix being, the majority deck of the field. And so I thought like, okay, I need to get good at Phoenix. I need to practice it a ton, get tons of reps in. And I wasn't really having fun doing that. And I wanted to queue up with Garuda or with Karuga and Quint and just bash people's brains in with big fatties. And yeah, like I was just having success with it on the ladder. Now, evaluating ladder results is a skill. I think it's really important to realize how many people are conceding to your Quint when you have 3 spark doubles in hand, and that shouldn't actually count as a win for you because no one's going to do that in a professional level tournament. But I did think like my results were showing me this was a really truly viable deck. And at some point, honestly, it was a gut call for me of like, I feel like this deck clicks with me. I feel like I get it in a way that maybe the rest of our team hasn't totally yet. And I know how to win with this for some reason. I really don't know what it was, but that week right before deck reg, when I tried to pitch it and give the case for it, I think I said like, if I could force everyone to register this, I would, and we'd have a 55% win rate, and I'll take a 55% win rate going into the tournament. I never claimed it was broken. I don't think it is. I think it's really easy to attack. But with the current meta, it felt to me like there was a chance this could be a really good choice. And
Well,
I understood things about how to play it
and
somehow.
there's only so much of the scope of the format that you can focus on. And so I know from my experience testing for the PT that like this deck was not really considered by anyone. And it wasn't really like messed with or tested against just because like you don't expect this to be a big portion of the field. It ended, I think 2 players ended up registering this at the Pro Tour. Like it just
And they did
doesn't.
well.
What's that?
They did well,
And they
which is
did
the thing I
well.
was kind of locked into. I was like, interesting.
Yes, and they did well. But so it's just not and I in doing my due diligence ran it through a league, went 4-1 on Magic Online, was sort of like why isn't anyone considering this deck? Like and I did, certainly was just truly doing what a Twitch chatter from the Arena Champs would have been doing, was just clicking buttons, like didn't really understand like the picking the spots, the land sequencing, the fetch it, whatever, like and managed to 4-1. And I was like, why aren't people playing this? I was like, because no one wants to flip coins at the Pro Tour. And I was like, I mean, I get that. Like you do a lot of deciding to play this deck is like I put my hands, or I put my fate in the hands of something else perhaps. But you do have, if you know what you actually have agency over in this deck, I think that feels a lot less so. And so what happened? So for me, I went into this Wednesday night meeting where Ryan pitched the deck, feeling very confident I was going to play Phoenix. I was sort of over the decision paralysis of what are we going to pick? Do we think that people are going to bring a lot of Phoenix? Do we think people are going to bring a lot of Amalia to combat Phoenix? I was like, I just can't, like, I'm not leveling myself. I'll be mad at myself if I don't play what I think the best deck is. I may not be playing it at mastery level, but I'm sure I'm playing it fine enough. And Ryan was like, I really think y'all should play, that we should be playing Quint. And it gave me pause. And so I was like, all right, we got time. I'll play some matches with this on the ladder. And I went like 1-4 in my first 5 matches. And I messaged Ryan. I was like, not going great. Like, it was like lost like 2 really close matches and then lost 2 not very close matches. And you were like, hey, totally fair. Like, the deck's not for everybody. Like, give it. I'd encourage you to get some more reps before making a call. I was like, yeah, I'll play some more. And I hopped in our like video, or in our Discord, we had a voice video chat, and you were around. You were like, yeah, I'll bird some games. And it was in that like just handful of matches where I really learned a lot about how you were thinking about the deck, and one of the ways you were thinking about the deck, because what you'll see as we'll get to some keeper mulligan decisions in a few minutes here, but your opening hands are sketch to say the least in this deck. It's easy when your hand is like 4 lands, Ramper, Quintorius, Carnosaur. Like, obviously that's the dream. But a lot of times your hands are like 5 lands, Leyline Binding, Beanstalk Giant. And you're like, well, this doesn't do anything. And it's like, well, you kind of got to reframe what you're thinking about with opening hands. And coming from a limited perspective, a lot of it is like shift. I think going from constructed to limited, you're probably mulliganing too much. And going from limited to constructed, you're probably keeping too many hands. This deck, actually, you want to keep as many hands as possible. And there's a lot of ways to, I think, reframe how you're looking at opening hands. And I want to go back to something that you chatted about, Ryan, or the way you framed it was this sort of categories of A, B, and C for the sort of texture of the makeup of your hands.
Yeah, so I remember hopping on that Discord call with you and just playing some games and realizing like, oh, I think maybe what might be going on with some of the different results we're having with this deck is just I have been a lot more aggressive with my keeps, and for some reason maybe that's working out. And so that kind of prompted me to like try to come up with a framework for, okay, what am I actually doing differently here?
Mm-hmm.
And the thing I came up with, there's sort of like a very short version, and then there's like that ABC framing that you mentioned. We can do both. The short and sweet version of how I think about hands with this deck is, can this hand get me to a state where I have 5 or 6 mana in play and I'm not dead? Really, that's the job of any hand. I didn't mention in that sentence, and have a combo piece to play. The thing that you have to have a lot of faith with in this deck is you are going to draw enough action or enough combo pieces to resolve them through thought seizes, through counter spells, or just, have them on time against an aggro deck, for example.
And that's what makes the Garuda version so appealing, I think, is that
Yeah.
you have 12. I mean, Garuda is obviously the weakest. It's not deterministic. It's not guaranteed or whatever. And we'll talk about why I think, but with the prominence of vampires, it gets a lot better. But it's there. And so you have 12 versus 8 ways to like just trust the top of your deck.
And you also have Karuga deterministically every game
Correct.
if you need it, which is good at drawing you cards, especially if you have a binding hand. And if you're not drawing the threat, the combo piece hand, you're probably drawing the binding hand. So like there's a lot of kind of redundancy and just ways to continue churning through your deck. It's almost more of a ramp deck than it is like a Splinter Twin style deck, as
Correct.
far as I think of it. And so, yeah, that's like the simplest framing of what you want out of a hand. Basically, can this get me to a game state where I am alive and have mana? Obviously, you would like a combo piece as well. That's kind of part of this. So the ABC framing is A is functional mana. So you need your lands. This mana base is really funky. It's kind of beautiful in a lot of ways. Massive shout out to whoever designed this mana base, because we spent like an hour, or at least I spent an hour deep diving and trying to like do the math on ley lines and double pips for Impersonator and Garuda and the Thought Distortion post board and enough green sources for fetching and enough red-white pairs for Quint. And it was so hard to try to improve this mana base without harming us in some other area. You need enough basics to fetch with herds and Janukis and etc. It's a beautiful, beautiful, sometimes clunky, but sometimes really, really functional mana base. So anyway, A is for a hand, an opening hand, you need good mana. You'll get draws where you have like only Naya mana because you run a lot of Naya lands and you have a lot of blue-black tri-lands, and you need one of those to kind of be fully active. So your lands need to work. You need to have enough of them. That's why we run 28, so that you can keep something like a 2-lander that needs to draw one in the next 2 turns to hit a ramp spell. And actually, one of the tunes I would say that we did is we added that 28th land. Most lists were running 27. I think that's a pretty important change.
Well, and also and it's worth noting that like a lot of the lists, whatever, if we're looking at, especially because Explorer lists like don't exist. There's like no way to check. This is like the first major Explorer tournament, basically, that has happened. So you go off Pioneer lists. Like, there just aren't recent Goldfish Pioneer lists for this. And the ones that exist are all sort of just carbon copies of themselves. And they look quite different to this. They're not playing Garuda's main. They're not playing Clever Impersonators. They're playing Release to the Wind instead, which is the 2 and a blue. Exile a thing, and then it can be cast for free. And it's not playing Cavern of Souls. All of which, like, obviously there's like a sort of chain reaction if you want this, like, you have Clever Impersonators, well then you want Garudas because there's extra hits for Garuda or whatever. Garudas want Impersonators over Release to the Wind rather. And the more creature based that this is, well then Cavern of Souls comes into play. Obviously it didn't come up for us. Well, it still does come up against Phoenix, I guess, but like not a lot of
in the finals it did, but before that it was completely irrelevant.
Not a lot of counter spells floating around in the 32 decks. But yeah, the 28 lands, a 4 of Herd Migration. I think we were all pretty low on Herd Migration. Like we had been messing with what's the single blue /
Odawara?
No. The single blue split card, single blue and then 4 and a green that we had.
Reason to Believe.
Reason to Believe we had been messing with for a bit because you can like reason, scry 3, and basically the dream is Beanstalk Giant for your island or Fertile Footsteps for your island. Island casts reason. You find Carnosaur in like the top 3, put it second, draw your top card, and then cast Believe to Carnosaur. So it gave you like slightly maybe then that's 13 ways to combo instead of 12. Ended up opting for the migrations, the life gain I think being good and just smoothing out the mana. But anyway,
migration is kind of the easiest way to play like 58 cards in this deck is kind of why we went with it.
Right.
I would say.
Yeah.
the like there's like 55 or so like really 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 tight slots, and then you have like a couple flexes that are almost always the stuff you're boarding out.
Yeah.
um
Right. There's
yeah,
the Chafet monitor. That's like again a nod to Garuda. This is like I think
a
in our
more
side
uncounterable ramp,
in our
like
side
yeah,
yeah
sort of
uncounterable
little
ramp being good,
reasons.
instant speed, so you can pass with it rather than fertile footsteps being sorcery
A
speed,
little
and
bit more threat
counterable.
density because it's drawing you a card as opposed to the other ramp spells. There's like
But
a
in our
bunch of little
sideboard
reasons
guides,
you'll
like
want
almost
one.
every match,
Yeah,
Chafet monitor was out. Right.
yeah, it's just the clunkiest ramp spell.
Yeah.
um yeah. Okay, sorry, we got on a tangent, but
No.
back
So
to hand
ABC. Yeah.
keeping.
Yeah.
Yeah, ABC. So A is functional mana, the most important thing by far in this deck. Just noting that. Um, B, you would think it's again like a Quint, right? No, either ramp or disruption. I kind of think of these as the same thing with this deck. You're really just trying to buy yourself time or earn yourself time, whichever works. You just want to get to that game state where you have enough mana to play your threat. Um, and so, yeah, ley lines count for this. Post board Bedecks count for this, especially against Amalia. You really want a lot of interaction. So there's a bit of a differentiator with like ramp being worse than interaction against Amalia, but generally game one, I kind of think of them as the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
And so every card in this deck is an A or a B or a C. Check them all out. They're either clones or A, B, and C's. And Clever Impersonator also kind of counts as interaction as well, just to speed bump your opponent.
Mm-hmm.
And then C obviously is a combo piece. You would like to have one of those in hand just to make sure that you will be able to play one at some point, as long as you don't get thought seized. But it's really the least important part of like keeping a hand with this deck, I think. So I keep almost every hand that has A plus B, which I think a lot of people might mulligan. I think that's like the biggest thing. And then I keep a good amount, like maybe half of hands that have A plus C. It depends on whether you're on the play or the draw, whether you have a Quint specifically or a different kind of combo piece, and what the matchup is for sure. This was an open deck list tournament, so we knew if we were playing against a deck that could put us under a lot of pressure. But yeah, the A plus C hands are kind of the most interesting. If you don't have two of the three, you're almost for sure mulliganing. If you don't have A, you're almost for sure mulliganing. So like you need an A plus B plus C, an A plus B, or sometimes an A plus C hand. That's really the framework that I was using to explain for our team. And luckily, and I want to chalk this up a little bit to variance. I think after I sort of explained my thoughts on the deck, we had better runs on ladder, and that kind of convinced you and Glossu to switch over to the deck.
I went 13
and that is yeah.
I went 13-7 in 20 matches. That's including that 1-4 start. In about a 48-hour period after, and that puts me to like Friday morning after our Wednesday night meeting. And I was like, okay, because so again, my takeaways from PT testing was my thoughts, the sort of like understanding my limitations as a player. And I was like, I don't know if under pressure Thoughtseize and counterspell decks are what I should be, how I'm going to best set myself up for success. But I also wanted to trust myself to adopt a deck late, because there was this Jeskai Creativity deck that Jason Yee almost top-8'd the Pro Tour with that I thought was incredibly impressive, that I was a little too scared to jump ship for, partially because we weren't allowed to test it on ladder, because we wanted to keep it a secret. And so I just didn't feel like I was going to be able to get enough reps with it. But I think in an alternate world, I might have trusted that and just been like, I can make the time. I think I can, and let's like maybe study some game replays from other players, etc., and piece together a way to do it, because I really liked how that deck played out. And so that was my other thing. I was like, okay, I don't want to do that, but I also don't want to miss out on an opportunity to jump ship for a deck that I do think is good. And that was how I felt about this. And it ended up like with half the field being Vamps, I would have been miserable playing Phoenix. I was incredibly happy when the metagame breakdown came out that I had Quint, because I felt like, again, like margins are small for constructed, but I do think this deck has somewhere between 50 and 55% against Vamps. And I just think it was a good choice. And we should say, like, it's all three of the players who registered this deck, and obviously, coverage has to make, it's great coverage had a lot of like positive things to say about the deck. partially because like it's the one like sort of surprise thing for the weekend to make like the narrative of the broadcast interesting. So like it's sort of a no-brainer for them to highlight it. But I really do think like this deck was a really cool choice for the weekend and proved itself not only in your performance, but and obviously Limited had this to back it up. We all went 9-9 in the Swiss portion of the tournament, so only 50% win rate. But all three of us going into the last round of Swiss were live for top 8. All three of us had win and ins for top 8. And mine was incredibly close, came down to game 3 of that final match, having Quint the second from the top rather than the top of my library. And that's like, but that like, I'm completely at peace with that. Truly, I'm not like salty or tilted about it because I'm just like, great. So like, it's a clear, coin flip away, but like that's a really good showing for this.
You're trusting the process. And
trust the
yeah,
process,
like,
man.
I think all three of us, the Quint pilots for sure, for this tournament, were just like, yeah, stuff's going to fall how it is, but we are trying to play correctly and just play the Magic in front of us, which I think is the mindset that you need for this type of tournament. You can't be all in your head about what are the results actually going to be, because that's not the thing you can control.
Right. So let's get into, we got a couple keeper mull examples, and then Ryan's gonna do us the pleasure of taking us through his finals match. All right. So this first hand is a possible 7 against Vamps in game 2, and you're on the play here. So this hand has right? It has good-ish mana. You've got 4 of your 5 colors, and Giant can fetch a 5th, can get your white.
Yeah, although there's obviously a possibility that the Giant gets Thoughtseize, so that's, relevant to consider.
Right. But so I guess that's an interesting way to start of, like, does the fact that you're against Vamps even make you feel like not mulliganing more? Because they are like there are a 4 Thoughtseize deck main, and then 2 to 3 Duresses, or I guess some of them are 4 Thougeize, 1 Duress main, and then 1
and then
to
they
2.
usually have like 3 post board Duresses most of the time. And Duress isn't great against us. I mean, as this hand kind of illustrates, like,
correct.
But it does hit Quint. It does hit Herd Migration to maybe keep us off of a land. Like binding
hits
for
binding,
sure is a good disruptive thing. Mm-hmm. So they keep it in. They don't have a lot to bring in from the board, and some of the slots are sort of like sketchy anyway. So they have a lot to board out. They bring out the Fatal Pushes, Preacher of the Schism's pretty bad. So like they're bringing in all their Duresses, even though it's not great. And one of the ways you can take advantage of that is by keeping hands like this that Duress is going to whiff against and put your opponent on a mulligan.
Yeah, that's super smart.
Yeah, so that's a factor here for sure.
So one of the things that we didn't talk about in the A plus B plus C is that like the clones are dead. They're mostly dead draws. Like Spark Double especially is dead. Now, Clever Impersonator
in an opening hand, yeah, I consider Spark Double basically dead.
Clever Impersonator can certainly clone a Leyline. That's awesome. Certainly against Vamps can clone a Ripper. That's pretty big game. Though they often will have a way, like if they have a kill spell, they will have a way to kill it because they'll have, Zealots or Mutavaults or whatever to sack as fodder, but you'll at least get to negate the drain from that. This, I think, truly almost anybody playing this deck would look at this hand and say this is a mulligan. But not for you. Not for AC5, second place.
Not for limited player Ryan, who thinks, can this hand draw out of it? Yeah,
I'm here for it. So talk me up on this hand.
Yeah, so I think being on the play and being against Vamps are both very important here. Impersonator normally is kind of a pseudo dead draw, but against Vamps specifically, it negates their best draw that they can have against you, Sorin into Ripper. Obviously you mentioned they can have removal for that, but they need to also have a Mutavault or another creature and have the removal spell. And they're on like a bunch of disruption spells. They have a lot of other stuff in their deck. They need specifically the Sorin into Ripper draw plus a creature plus removal. And like, yeah, if they have that, sure, GG, like great. You kind of have to live with them beating you with their best draws, but this hand really negates like one of their stronger draws. And I think that's a huge reason to potentially keep it. You also just kind of have to have faith with this deck. So like you're playing against the Thoughtseize deck. Normally that would mean, or you would think like the first level of thought there is okay, I don't want to keep a hand where you take one of the cards away and it looks super sketchy now. But is a 6-carder, especially with
Yeah.
this deck, going to look better against Thoughtseize? Probably not. Um, Even if they Thougtseize you and take away your Beanstalk for finding your white, you don't have Leyline yet, you don't have Quint yet, and you have a lot of white sources in your deck that you can draw. Um, Obviously, I think the main thing is like this hand does not have any way to finish the game or end the game. Doesn't even have a binding to draw a card off of your Karuga. You're really just praying for the top of your deck. You've got to trust and have a lot of faith in that with this hand. But I think that's the correct way to play this deck. You're much more worried about getting yourself into a position where once you do draw whatever you need, you can cast it and you're still alive, than you're worried about having the thing already to play. And so, yeah, for me, this hand, it was close. Don't get me wrong. I looked at this and I was like, this is pretty sketchy. Should I really keep this? There's that pressure. I'm in a high level tournament. Am I going to look stupid? I think this was on a feature match. I don't even remember. I think this was game 2 against Jesse in round
This
4.
is in the
Jesse
semi.
Hampton,
Oh,
amazing
okay.
player,
Yeah.
super intimidating. Like that was definitely in my head here. But yeah, I ended up keeping this. I ended up losing the game. I whiffed on a Garuda that I top decked. So again, like there's that, you're going to top deck it in this deck. You have 12. And yeah, I think it was a correct to keep.
Yeah, I love that. And one of the things, again, we keep talking about impersonator copying Ripper. So there's really like, there's the other scenario. So obviously them playing Sorin into Ripper on 3, bummer. But you've got impersonator for that. The other scenario is they play Fable. Impersonator copying Fable is great
for you
for this hand and this deck. So sure, you don't get the reflection. It doesn't flip into anything, but getting that 2/2 as a speed bump, getting the loot
ramp and
2
dig is exactly what you want. This deck would play Fable if it couldn't discover
if it could. Yeah, for sure. So ends up being a keep here. So next hand we have is on the draw against Amalia, game 3. This is a 5-lander with a Beanstalk Giant and a Carnosaur. So we've got good-ish mana. This is that Naya heavy mana you were talking about. Disruption-ish with Carnosaur, though being on the draw means, so if you don't know, Amalia can combo on turn 3, right? They can, if they have all 3 pieces in their opening hand and getting to go like whatever, even if they go nothing on 1, Innkeeper on 2, Walker and Amalia on 3, or I guess it would be Amalia on 2 and then Innkeeper, Walker on 3.
You need the Innkeeper for the both on both, or for both on 3. But yeah, like
no, you
Amalia,
you can play Innkeeper on 3 and then use the treasure.
Oh
in
no,
your
you're
third
right.
land.
Yeah, you can do that. Yeah,
so
yeah,
whatever.
Way.
But so this deck can't beat, or this hand can't beat a turn 3 combo kill. And I think it's worth noting, we didn't chat about this. We did on Monday, but we didn't chat about the sideboard plan. Amalia was the deck we had most heavily sideboarded for. We should chat about that just real quick. So our sideboard plan, we had just 4 cards in the sideboard. 4 copies of Thought Distortion for the control matchup, which is just turns it such a hugely in your favor. Unfortunately, no copies of control entered the tournament, so we had 4 dead sideboard spots. Then we had 4 copies of Bedeck Bedazzle. A lot of lists run that main, but Bedeck just coming in, certainly for Amalia combo. You can actually cause the player to draw. You can cause the match to draw if you Bedeck at the right time mid combo. You can also just kill their creatures at a time, like, kill them before any combo has the possibility of happening.
I've never forced a match to draw with Bedeck. There have probably been spots that I wasn't aware of where I could have. I always find myself like killing their threats on site, and I think it's never come up, but I also might have not been aware of it when it did come up. Something that like you should be aware of for sure, and I maybe wasn't.
That was all Raph was trying to do when we talked about facing Amalia. He was like, "Oh, this causes the draw," and I was like, "Why are we trying to draw games?"
I think for a deck like Heroic, it makes a lot of sense because you have so many ways to do it, and it's like obviously a relevant interaction to be aware of for sure. I think with our particular deck, like, we're just trying to delay them and kill as many of their threats on site as possible. We're also worried about them beating us down with threats, so we kind of even have to kill things that
you don't have the luxury to wait.
Yeah.
So we had Bedeck Bedazzle, and then that was also for random aggro. If we expected Convoke or Heroic, which will lead to another card as well. Speaking of Amalia, 3 copies of Quakebringer as well, as just a way to sort of, Quakebringer cloned against Amalia is usually GG. So that we felt really good about that. And Amalia is a really tough matchup, so having 7 sideboard slots for that felt good. And then our last piece of the puzzle was a late addition was Consecrate Consume. So we had done some testing of Quint versus Red White Heroic. The matchup was abysmal. It was really bad. So much so that in sort of if I talk about, I switched at the 11th hour, then in the 12th hour, Ryan was like, I think this matchup is too bad. If we think 2 people are showing up with this deck, we maybe should switch to something else. But it's a really bad matchup. And part of it is that the Bedecks just get outclassed so quickly that then your real only ways to interact early are ley lines, because stuff gets out of range of 3 toughness. So Bedecks don't do it. Trumpeting Carnosaur discarded doesn't do it. It's really hard to make it work. And so we decided we had circled it, right? We'd all done the Scryfall search for split cards, and we're aware of what our large mana options were for this deck. And Consecrate Consume came back as what if we play this against Heroic? Because it gets around the sort of God's Willing Protection spells, recoups us some life. What if we put that in? And then by proxy, we were like, oh, you can also use Consume. It's pretty dang good against Vein Ripper, actually, because it gets around the ward. Sure, they get the drain 2 from sacrificing it, but then you're gaining 6. So it buys you some time there. And then we're like, well, maybe it's also good against Phoenix, right? You nab a Phoenix out of the yard with Consecrate. Well, that we ended up being a little less excited about, just because the window of opportunity to actually get a Phoenix, usually when a Phoenix is coming back, it's they cast a spell, they cast a second spell, they loot with Shredder, they discard a Phoenix, they cast a third spell, and Phoenix is coming back. That window of time to exile the Phoenix is pretty small. And usually your window of time, if you're not holding up, waiting for Consume, Consecrate is often taking the spot of Herd Migration as just your this is my 2-mana way to do something, if you can, if there is something to exile. And so you're usually just cycling it before then anyway. So, but because of Red White Heroic never showed up in the tournament as well as Control.
Lucky for us, I think it could have been easily, something that a couple people played and they just
and
didn't.
no, other than
a bad Vamps matchup, but yeah, I could easily see some people showing up.
Other than Gruul Vehicles, there really wasn't an aggro deck.
And Gruul Vehicles is actually what I beat in my win-in for top 8. And I think it's a very good matchup. They're on average a turn slower than most of the aggro decks in the format. They have a draw that can run you over, but they also really don't have any answers besides specifically Bone Crusher Giant for the Quint way to combo. And so, yeah, I think Gruul Vehicles is actually if that were the one aggro deck that showed up, and it was, we got very lucky.
Yeah. Yeah. So, okay. So back to we've got this opener. So there's a long diatribe to talk about the sideboard, but I think worth doing because the sideboard is not present in this hand, but is present in your mind, I think, in this game 3 on the draw against Amalia, because you don't have any Bedecks in your opener and you don't have a Quakebringer. And, again, I think it's tempting,
this hand,
to keep.
Pseudo has A plus B plus C. It's got 75% A. I would
right.
say. You kind of want, to draw blue and black sources and tutoring them up with Beanstalk. You have to choose one, and you got to use the Cavern for your Garuda maybe, and you can't use it for Impersonator. The mana is not perfect here. It kind of looks like it could be, but it's not. So it's important to note that. I think this is a very matchup-specific hand as well, and a play-draw-specific hand also. Against Amalia, we have so many things we board in compared to most matchups that, you're not looking for your typical hands as much. You're looking for hands that specifically can remove their creatures or can Quint them on turn 4, which is sort of how you steal games in game 1. So yeah, you do have Carnosaur here, but that's your only combo piece. And so if you're getting rid of that, you're again, trying to rely on the top of your deck. This hand, it was tempting. It was close, but in one of our tougher matchups, I think this has to be a mulligan, especially on the draw where they combo you on turn 3 a shocking amount of the time, 30% of the time or something, and you just straight up lose if they do that here.
Yeah. All right. Last one we want to take a look at here is game 2 on the draw against Vamps. 5 lands, Quintorius, Garuda. So we've got A, right? All colors, or I guess no blue, but all colors present and accounted for the benefit of like Cavern of Souls can name Kraken and be able to you can cast Garuda. You have red and white for Quint.
You've got a turn 2 ley line, which is something to factor in. Yeah,
If you
like
top
this hand
deck it,
has good
right?
mana. Yep.
Um, so I mean, what's the like? Whatever. If they have Thoughtseize, they have Thoughtseize. But like when you think about if they have Thoughtseize, that's also bad when you go to 6. Because this again, if we're not thinking of the deck as A plus B plus C, it also like sure you don't need all 3 in your opener, but you'd like 2, and there's not only so much room.
Here it's resilient a little bit to top these, and you have the mana, right? So like there's a lot of reasons to want to keep this hand in the Vamps matchup. I think were you kind of leaning towards a keep?
I would keep this myself. Like we've as I said, we recorded this all again on Monday. So I've had these conversations with Ryan, and I came in, this first hand, I came in being like, come on, you got to be kidding me. But I'm convinced about the first hand. I also was on the fence about this one. I'm convinced about the second hand. I'm still not convinced about the third hand. The third hand, I think I still would keep.
Yeah. So I ended up mulliganing this.
Yeah.
I'm also at Magic is a hard game. I'm totally open to being wrong here. I think I spent like a solid minute. I think this was a top 8 match, like quarters or something. Talk about high pressure. Like, am I going to keep this and then just like get run over immediately? Maybe I was over indexing on that too much, but I still think I'm on the side of wanting to mulligan this. On the play, it is a keep, but on the draw, I think you're just too slow against a Vamps matchup where they can go turn 2 Blood Tithe. If they Soar and Ripper you, you're basically dead with this hand. And if they have double disruption, which is what they usually have when they're not putting you under pressure,
right?
You have, very little with this hand. Now, like trusting the top of your deck is a legit thing, but I would much rather trust the top of my deck with at least like knowing that I'll cast a ramp or a disruption spell during the game to get myself to the point where I can top deck. It just felt a tick too slow for me to keep. I think I ended up losing this game. I don't exactly remember how it played out, but the 6 was better for what it's worth. I don't remember exactly, but it was better.
No, believe me, I am fully like we are in host expert mode. I defer to you. I'm just still like that.
And no, Magic is hard though. Like we're 2 good players who are just talking about like a difficult decision, and I find that stuff fascinating. Like there's so many of these that it's just so cool to talk about. And like one of my favorite parts of playing these high level tournaments is that your opponent is going to be making very few mistakes, and so all of these little decisions that are so interesting you have to make in such a short amount of time, and you get to break them down and dissect and analyze and talk about it later and learn and grow and just like become better at making these.
Yeah, Glossu, our third explorer Quint player here, is in chat pointing out that mulligans to 6 are often easy with the deck, because if you're keeping and you've got a clone and you've got 6 clones in the deck, your clone is your easy, like, great to the bottom. And I'm so much less likely to top deck that later on to mess with my combo math. Shall we get to your finals match?
Yeah, let's do it.
Sweet.
So for what it's worth, just noting, I really like this opener. Doesn't have threats. It's on 7. The Spark Double is dead, but I've got Herd Migration that I can, ramp with. I've got double Leyline, which is really going to keep them off of pressure, and I've got really good mana. So this is a pretty easy keep. I'm pretty happy with it.
And you can see I didn't really realize this because I hadn't played against any Phoenix in the Swiss, of which there were only 4 decks. There's a lot. They have so many dead cards.
Yeah. So actually, can you pause here? Because Tony's keep, just going to note throughout this match, I'm probably going to be singing praises of Tony because like he's clearly an excellent Phoenix player.
Yeah.
And Phoenix is such a hard deck to pilot that I think we're both just going to point out decisions that are really clearly very hard that he does excellently. But he's keeping this hand because it has a turn 2 Ledger Shredder. And he knows this is something that Paul was really emphasizing in our testing. You need pressure against Quint. You basically mulligan everything that doesn't have a turn 2 Ledger Shredder in game 1 or Shredder or Pyro in game 2. Maybe you keep like the best forms of hands that can bin Phoenixes and put them under, pressure with that. But yeah, Tony has like 3 pseudo dead cards in his opener here, and he's just like, snap it off. Yep, I have a Shredder. I'm good to go. I have an Opt. I can start digging and find what I need.
Well, but luckily for you, you've got the Ledger Shredder.
This
answer
is why
here.
having the bindings for the Shredders are so important in this matchup.
Yeah. So
you get to basically negate their best draw.
Shock in the binding. Did you top deck the Sacred Foundry there? No.
Yeah, let's go back. Did I? Because
that's the
sequencing with mana.
No, you didn't. So you just but you top decked. No, you just blew it.
So pause. I remember thinking about this. Often you will want to.
I guess you have the herd migration
if you have Foundry plus Zagoth Triumph specifically. However, in this hand, I had another tap lands. That's one factor that I maybe wanted to get down on turn 2 if Tony didn't play something on 2. And I also had the migration. And so I thought about this and remember registering it as like, I could do the typical non-typical play where you play the Foundry first because it makes sure that you don't have to shock.
Mm-hmm.
But I wanted to give myself the optionality of being able to herd on turn 2 instead.
Yeah, that makes sense.
I thought that the shocking didn't matter as much because I was gaining 3 life from the herd at some point anyway. And just the possibility of being able to go tap land into ramp spell if I draw that on turn 3 was something that I wanted to set up. So,
yeah, that makes sense. Okay, so we snap off the... What the heck? Okay, my gosh. Would you... There we go. Okay, so we snap off the binding here.
Yep, you remove those on site, basically, as I was doing throughout the entire finals. There's one decision in the last game where I don't do that, and I think it could have been a mistake, so we can talk about that when we get there.
So it looks like we have the Esper Triome off to the left. Yeah, Rafine's Tower off to the left.
So generally in this deck, like I care a lot about getting tap lands out early, just because you want to have your untap land on the turn you're trying to play a combo piece. And so often you run into this decision of, do I play a ramp spell this turn with an untapped land, or do I get a tap land out? Usually it's correct to ramp because you're sort of +1 mana anyway. But yeah, it's an interesting call a lot of the time. And it's the finals, it's a match for $10,000. Like, I was just trying to take the time to think about any decision that felt like it could be important, which is, I think, a big skill because, like, pointing out just Tony's deck, right? We talked about Phoenix earlier having thousands of micro decisions. You'll see throughout this entire match, Tony makes really hard decisions super quickly a lot of the time, and then he tanks on decisions that seem simple or seem maybe not super impactful. And just watching a player who has that skill of like recognizing when something could actually be super important down the line, like he's doing here, right? With the River Glide, does he want to land here or not? Knowing in a match where you have to make so many decisions, like being able to make many of them quickly, intuitively, just get them out of the way, and then pause on the ones you need and just have that pacing of yourself and your own like thinking throughout the match is a huge skill, I think, in these high level tournaments. And just Magic skill in general. I think one of my weaknesses as a player a while ago and like systematically throughout my Magic career has been I play too quickly and I don't recognize the situations where you need to turn off autopilot and go into the tank about something. And so that's something I've been trying to work on for sure. And I think I did well last weekend.
Yeah. Interesting that Tony decided not to. So you saw after the Consider had the option to hold up the 2 mana for Jawari Disruption for Quint.
And he's deciding I'm dead to Quint here.
And he's deciding I'll lose to Quint. This like I think the and him drawing Treasure Cruise there was like really made that feel true. Like of just saying, I'm dead to this. If I can't be dead to both Quint and not developing. Like, so I'll just be dead to Quint and I'll keep developing. Which I think is a really, like, I probably would have, again, why I don't trust myself to play
He
counterspell
makes that
decks right
decision
now.
that could lose him a game in a match for $10,000 so quickly and without fear at all. And that's something that both of us had talked about with Quint, like not having fear in the moments where, look, I'm dead if you have the counterspell. But
Yeah, that's what I signed up for by picking this deck.
Jam.
Yeah, exactly.
This was fun. He almost countered my uncounterable Karuga, but didn't. Caught it at the last second.
Yeah, so you have a Cavern on Dino from turn 3. We didn't talk about this, but Caverns are, what to choose with Cavern is very tricky, and it's one of the 5 decisions you get in the game, and when to deploy Cavern is also very tricky. You'll notice, I think we'll see it in a later game, like Ryan waiting until the final time, because one of the, like, if you don't wait, your opponent may not, like, let's say you've got Cavern on Dino already, and you're gonna untap with 6 mana. Well, Tony may not be as interested in holding up counter magic because
he might know that he needs to present lethal in the air the following turn in case I Dino into a bunch of clones, make a big board, and I need to be dead.
Whereas prior to that, if you don't play Cavern last, then he has to consider, oh, well, maybe I need to hold up counter magic, and then you can drop the Cavern to make it nullified. Now, yes, counter magic can then still be, utilized on the subsequent things that are discovered into, but you still get to stick that, stick the Garuda, stick the 7/6. We'll actually talk about the timing of Garuda and counter spells and interaction in this run of matches as well. So here we're just going for a big beanie.
Yeah, I mean, I think I could have gone Herd Migration here, but I'm trying to play around like Spell Pierce, for example, which is a card that can't counter Beanstalk.
And this looks like a mistake, right? We were talking when we looked at this match on Monday. What Tony does looks like a mistake because has the option to Jawari Disruption, the Beanstalk Giant, ends up using 3 cards in hand to kill it. He's going to Lightning Axe, Pitch Disruption, and then Fiery Impulse. And I was like, well, if he's doing all that, why didn't he just Jawari Disruption the thing?
Right. Classic, like, for us, limited player brain of just like use one card to deal with it. I have the play available. It's a really good play. I'm just going to make it.
It's like, oh, well, he just knows what he needs for Treasure Cruise all the time.
Didn't hover over his yard at all. That's one of the terrifying things if you're really paying attention to Tony in this match is like he never checks the number of cards in yard. He knows. He always knows. It's in his brain and he's just doing the math intuitively, which is crazy. It clearly like has so many reps with this Phoenix deck.
Yeah. So options here are, it feels like mostly just cast Phoenix and hold up Opt.
Yeah. And he's again like kind of dead if I have like a lethal threat.
Right.
But he knows he can't play around it, right? He's just got to do the thing of you don't have it because, yeah. So here I draw Quint, and this is a decision to pause on because it's a deterministic kill, right? If I can resolve it against Phoenix. I know the math. If I have 1 Spark Double in hand, we had a little spreadsheet where you're like 60% to do 44 damage and 30% to do 32 damage or whatever. I think it's different with a Spark Double in hand. But basically, that was me pausing, checking, and reading Tony's list to make sure, okay, there's nothing for 1 mana that he can do here that is going to disrupt me. I know that if I cast Quint on 7, Spell Pierce doesn't do it. He doesn't run Torch the Tower. I'm going to get there.
Right.
And that's the kind of thing where, like, it's a decision where you can figure out all of the relevant information. So you should take the 20 seconds it takes to do that.
And so Quint's going to pop off here. And I think also worth noting, I think unlucky in Tony's list running so much counter magic, but lucky that he didn't decide he's running 4 impulses, right? He's not running any torches. Torch the Tower, which is kind of surprising to me because I think with like the prevalence of vamps, you would think, well, it's a way to pick off Sorin after they drop Vein Ripper to stop them from being able to make it a 7/6 lifelink. Certainly it's good splash damage against us to kill a Quint after it minuses. Good against opposing Phoenix lists. but really bad against opposing Phoenix lists when they're playing Shredder. So you had sort of said, and I think in your finals interview, about you might not even sideboard, right?
Yeah, sideboarding was super interesting in this match. Tony's list made it really difficult. Um, I don't know if we're paused here, but I could do like the deep dive on sideboarding now.
Go for it if you want.
Um, yeah, I would. So I had said, this was true for like our testing against Phoenix, and we talked about this a bit before. We were sort of going back and forth on whether Consecrate Consume was even good against Phoenix.
Yeah.
We had been testing against the Prophecytic Memory list that we had internally, and it was good there because they make really large creatures, and so we knew we wanted to bring it in there. Against non-crackling drakes, Tony did have 3 of those, but I wasn't sure he was going to bring them in. He had enough stuff to cut and bring in anyway with all of his disruption and cutting the burn spells. It's good against drakes, but other than that, it's really only good at taking out a Leisure Shredder, and even then, it's only taking it out when it's grown and dug them to their stuff. So, wasn't a huge fan of Consecrate Consume, but Tony also had 2 Ashioks in his 75, and Ashiok doesn't seem like a very good card in the matchup, but what it can do is it can turn off our rampers, which Tony's on the play. This is game 2, and I won game 1, which I did in the finals. I don't think it's like we're really that favored in game 1, but we're slightly favored for sure. If Tony's on the play, he can turn off my turn 3 ramper with an Ashiok. Never came up, but for that reason, it was more about wanting to bring out some of the deck searchers searching for lands, just to have them slightly less likely to not get totally blanked in my opening hand. And that let me bring in a couple Consecrate Consumes. I brought in 1 Bedeck because I saw it can obviously hit a Shredder if it gets lucky on timing. Can gain you 3 to have you not die, to then slam your combo piece if they're attacking you with Phoenixes. And it can hit a Young Pyromancer, which is a pretty important card to remove. So having 5 ley lines plus 1 Bedeck, I think I felt better about than just having the 4 ley lines. And then I brought in 2 Consecrate Consumes. Not all 3. I don't think they're very good, but it's kind of a hedge if he boards in Crackling Drake, which he ended up doing in the last game, maybe even the second to last game, but the last match. To get me, it's kind of a concession to that. It gets a Drake, it gains a lot of life, but it can also nab Phoenixes out of the yard, and it's basically just like more filler essentially to just kind of replace the shaved searchers that I brought out. So this sideboarding approach I took was pretty close to not sideboarding at all, and it was sort of the version of not sideboarding at all that I felt was okay, hedging in every direction basically. I was also, to admit it, like just kind of winging it because we hadn't really tested against this type of list. I was just trying to keep as much consistency in the deck as possible and some, outside answers to whatever strategy he was choosing, because he had a lot of options post board.
Yeah. Want to talk about why no thought distortions against Phoenix?
Yeah. Honestly, like, could have been a mistake. I don't say that because Twitch chat was suggesting them, but I think Twitch chat could have been onto something here. Since the tournament, I've talked to like a Quint player in Pioneer on Twitter, one of the players who played it at the PT, and he seems pretty high on thought distortion against Phoenix. He's running a different list than us. He's got the Release to the Wind version without Garudas and his like Shark Typhoons in his board. So it's a different context, but
yeah.
I think we probably did make a mistake not testing it at least against Phoenix. Our internal list was much more proactive, trying to pressure Quint rather than trying to play this super, like, I can answer whatever you're doing with like an Aether Gust or a Mystical Dispute game 2. So we didn't really test against it, and I wasn't comfortable playing a super clunky spell where we don't have a lot of black sources. I'm boarding out some of the land searchers. It probably would have ended up being pretty good in these games, but I think the mistake was not necessarily not bringing it in. I think the mistake was not learning whether or not it was viable.
Yeah.
And we probably could have done that if we had more time.
Yeah, I think that's true. Because you can see, like, so Tony siding out the full 4 Lightning Axe, the full 4 Impulse, bringing in some, like, all this disruption. Gust, Negate, Triple Dispute, Double Borrower, mostly for petty theft as ways to disrupt the combo, and then the one of Young Pyromancer. So a pretty nice, like, I don't know how much this deck specifically was in mind. Like, there's no like silver bullety type cards
He
here.
ended up being very good.
But his sideboard, the fact that he can take out 8 cards that are effectively dead and bring in 8 cards that are quite live is a great spot for him. So this hand, you mulligan this, right? I'm so tempted to keep this.
No, I kept.
You keep. Okay. I was like,
I should have.
you Triome 1, then you have Herd Migration into Tanuki, both uncounterable ramps. Yeah, okay. Great.
Good, I'm not crazy.
Yeah, good on. That's how I feel too.
This game was super interesting because he kept playing blue lands, and I was like, huh. I wonder. I mean, like, obviously, you don't need a ton of red post board because you bring out the burn spells, but like the fact that he only needed that to win this game was super fascinating. And I was noting it as the game was developing, but yeah, got run over.
Another reason to be so surprised by Drake in game 3.
Yeah.
Because he's not making any, like, right now he's not making any mana decisions to Drake because he doesn't need to, because they're not in, I assume. I assume this was a play draw decision from him.
Yeah. So here, I do want to pause here because this is something that I could easily see being a mistake. Not right here. If you go to the turn where the connive triggers on the stack, or like end of the turn, it's coming up. I was trying to anticipate.
Yeah. Yep.
I normally try to kill Ledger Shredder whenever possible in this matchup, and we had all decided on that in testing. Like, it's their best threat. It digs them and puts you under pressure, and for Phoenix that's huge, especially post board where they're finding really specific answers, like digging to their Aether Gust, digging to their negate, which Tony did. But this hand that I have, I've only got one other land. I don't really want to like play it next turn necessarily, although I'll probably have to. But like, basically, I don't have a lot of mana development besides the 3 rampers I have in hand. I have the Cavern to force through a threat, and I just want to develop my mana as fast as possible. So I could have taken the turn off from doing that to, on my own end step, kill the Shredder here. And I still don't know if that was a mistake or not. I would have to really do a close watch back of this game and see, like, how much did this Shredder do? Did quite a lot, but versus like if I had taken an entire turn off, not ramped at all, and been much slower setting up my threats, then I don't know. One of the really, really tough Magic decisions. I probably, one of the more like meta mistakes I made here was just not thinking about this hard enough. I was just dialed in on like, I've got Cavern, I've got rampers, I can jam a threat much faster than Tony can kill me here, so I'm just going to go over that plan. I probably should have recognized this as a point to pause, especially in such a high stakes match, but just in general.
Yeah. So that would have been prior to this connive trigger going on the stack, but here it is.
So now, just noting, I know about Spell Pierce, it's revealed, and that will become relevant later.
Mm-hmm. And one of the things folks might be wondering of like, well, no, I guess that's not true. Never mind. I'll save the analysis to you, sir.
I don't know what you were going to say. I wasn't recognizing anything here.
Just thinking about the difference between Beanstalk and Tanuki, and one of the things that you...
Oh, yeah.
I mean, instant speed versus sorcery speed.
We didn't get to it today.
Yeah, just like... Yeah. One of the 5 decisions you get with the deck is, when you're choosing to cycle stuff and when not, and it's just like, you may need that extra mana at some point, when you were birding that handful of matches that I had, just like the decision of, oh, well, what you could have done is if you had Tanuki'd here when you didn't need the untapped land, then you could have Fertile Footsteps the following turn, had 3 mana untapped, and then bought Karuga. And I just wasn't thinking about that. I was just sort of like, oh, I'm going to fire, like, this one's uncounterable or whatever. So just thinking about the applications there is important.
It's one of the lines where like there is a correct way to sequence it in a particular situation, but you need to just get the reps in and have the place where it matters come up, and then you won't make the mistake again. And like it was, I was birding during that, and so I could point it out, and then you now for the rest of your time playing with this deck knew like, okay, this is the correct way to sequence it. If I don't need it to be uncounterable here, I could use the untapped land in the future. Gonna do the Beanstalk second. In this matchup, it's a little bit more difficult because the Beanstalks can be spell pierced, so it is really relevant. But that turn, I was only on 3 lands, and so you definitely don't want your first ramper to be spell pierced, and so I was going for the Tanuki just being uncounterable. So here, yeah, so this turn is where I'm deciding whether to play Carnosaur or Garuda and naming what I name on Cavern.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, if you can actually pause.
Yeah.
Knowing about the Spell Pierce is really the reason that I made this play. Because Carnosaur can discover into a Quint, but that Quint gets immediately Spell Pierced. I'm under enough pressure in the air where Carnosaur is not going to win me this game on the ground. I'm getting outraced pretty easily there. Even if Carnosaur goes into a clone, right, I might not be dead next turn, but they can Mystical Dispute the clone. They can like bounce Carnosaur in response. They can do a lot of stuff to that with obviously Brazen Borrower that I don't know Tony doesn't have in hand. There's also Aether Gust, which is obviously relevant, and the commentators pointed this out because Aether Gust was in Tony's hand. That's another reason to not play the Carno, because even if you make it uncounterable, they can still gust it. That's why they play that card. And then, yeah, basically, like, Garuda is not deterministic. So it's really scary to play Garuda into a board where you are under a lot of pressure. But basically, like, realistically, knowing about the Spell Pierce, there is roughly a 50-50 chance that Carno is going to fizzle into Spell Pierce regardless here. And so that made the Garuda decision really easy, because an uncounterable Garuda, there is no way for Tony to prevent that from hitting the board. And even if he can bounce it, for example, I could still mill into a Carno and go off from there. Or if he, like, yeah, he can't Mystical Dispute the clone that I get off of it, and I can build a board from there. It's not deterministic. It is a scarier way to try to get into your combo, and we'll see, like, I basically fizzle from it, but it was the correct play, not only for playing around Aethergust reasons, which, yeah, I was thinking about, but the main reason I made it was that it was a more safe way to combo, even though Garuda isn't often that.
Right. Yeah. Well, it's a less guaranteed way, but more guaranteed to get through what he's likely to have.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And even guaranteed has, because I know about the Spell Pierce.
Mm-hmm.
I got lucky in so many ways throughout this tournament. I top decked a ton of Quints. I top decked exactly what I needed so much. I had keepable opening hands the majority of the time. I got very unlucky with Garudas. I think they go off more often than I showed on camera by quite a bit in this tournament.
Yeah. And here you have the option between what, Prankster and Phoenix?
I'm choosing between Impersonator and Phoenix here.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you have a chance to reroll the Garuda here. You have a chance to reroll.
And so, like, I'm just taking the time on this because, like, I'm trying to figure out, is there a possibility that I'm dead in the air next turn? That would really matter for, like, whether or not I can build a big Garuda board. And
because you've milled an extra Phoenix now.
Right.
Yeah.
There's that. So I might need to grab that Phoenix, but that also loses to various other things. And so I thought I was probably getting the Impersonator just to reroll on Garuda, but it was close enough that I wanted to take the time to make sure. and then I whiff and only hit a pick lock, and that's just not good enough. And that's, that's trusting the process with this deck. That's where it'll get you. Like, you just gotta make the decisions and accept what comes of them.
Yeah, and here Tony does end up getting lethal. Sort of 12 ways from Sunday, I believe. What he ends up doing is now he's got one spell cast, can do Petty Theft to bounce your flying blocker, which will trigger Connive, get a Phoenix in the bin.
Already got another Phoenix in the bin and can like play a spell and spell pierce it or whatever. I think this is the spell pierce play, which like good Phoenix player is just going to see that immediately.
Yeah,
he probably already sees it and is just double checking his math. Like, that's what I'm guessing here.
He doesn't need it, right? Because he can just
think maybe he even didn't need it, but it was like the most efficient way to do it.
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah, getting their Arclights or their Picklocks is not what you usually want to do, because they have a bunch of ways. In game one, they can just kill them with burn that they probably have stuck in their hand.
Right.
In game two, they can do stuff like this. Yeah, I think this is a scenario where, if you're Tony, like, high-level Magic players know this, where if you see a line that deterministically wins, you don't need to do any more thinking. You should double check, but regardless of whether it's the optimal line, if it deterministically wins the game, it is the optimal line, and you don't have to find a better one.
Mm-hmm.
And that part of that, like, economics of just thought spent on decisions is
right.
Like, interesting to me.
Yeah, only so much.
Because I think Tony like saw that line, checked that it would actually factually win the game, and then once he concluded that it would, didn't really think about anything else and just executed it, which is a way to sort of save yourself some mental bandwidth, instead of trying to be like, well, could I deal more damage? Like, it doesn't matter.
Right. So they've got...
Here's where the Drake comes in.
Right. So the Drake coming in over Ashiok. Okay. On the draw, rather.
On the draw, which Ashiok significantly worse on the draw, for sure.
Right.
He's keeping one copy in, I think, just to, like, keep me honest, probably. But, yeah. I'm very happy about this opener. It's got a binding.
He had two Ashioks main? I thought it was...
No, he had one main, one board.
Okay.
Yeah. But I think Mora, who was doing our, like, estimating what people would sideboard for our team, which, again, huge shout out to them, was expecting Tony to bring in both Ashioks, because he just had enough stuff to cut. So
right.
That's what I was sort of leaning on, expecting.
So we missed it, but another great opener.
Like, funny. There's so much depth to this match. I had not played against Phoenix all weekend. I was figuring all of this out on the fly at the end of a really long day.
Mm-hmm.
I easily could have been making tons of mistakes, but, like, I'm still really proud of how I played here. And, like, yeah, Magic is just so good and so hard. Sorry, what were you gonna say?
No, nothing. Just like, it just feels like, again, so how much nicer to have this deck than Phoenix, to have that at the, like, we haven't even talked about this, but I had just massive food poisoning Friday night, and so all of Saturday, like, I played my round, set a timer
also, just like, what a run given that, like, my goodness, dude. I
just played my round, set a timer for the end of the round, and then curled up in a ball on the bed behind me, and then just did that 6 times. But I was like,
4-2 day one.
But if I had to play Phoenix day one, I don't know what I would have, like, It was just so much easier for me to be like, okay, you got to make like 4 decisions this match. And you know what they are, just like take your time with those, and then just like,
and you've done the prep for them. Like,
don't misclick.
You've done
Quint.
The decisions. Yeah. You've done the thinking for yourself ahead of time.
And I also luckily faced
tournaments, like, that's what I prefer to do for myself. You know?
They faced. I luckily faced Vamps all 3 constructed rounds. I did have to play. We didn't even talk about limited. You 3-0'd your pod and beat the deck that beat me in match 2, which was the 4 Detective Satchel deck. But then I faced one of our teammates with double Deadly Cover Up in match 3. And I was just like,
That's a lot of thinking. Yeah, you
nothing
really
easy
need to
about
figure
that.
out like your threat density
Nothing
and
easy about
what you
that.
have left to win the game. Yeah.
Yeah.
And deadly cover up, being able to see your opponent's deck list in limited, so different. Like I'm
Mm-hmm.
sure that was a factor.
Mm-hmm.
I just a limited note. I beat Tony barely in round one in draft. He had
Oh.
a super scary deck. He had double Wojak investigators and an Azoni.
Uh-huh. Whoa.
So I think I might have beaten the best deck at the table in round one, which
That's
I got pretty
crazy.
lucky. I just like had better draws and he didn't draw Azoni game two and
Wow.
three. But yeah. And then Tony, like, what a freaking run, losing the first round and then making it all the way to the finals and getting revenge on me.
Yeah.
The way he plays against Karuga here is fascinating and just like super high level, I think. He's really evaluating like, is this a threat that is going to kill me? And if it's not a threat that's going to kill me, I don't need to deal with it, and I'm going to use my mana to do other things and develop my board. Um, he's thinking about bouncing it here. Bouncing it would let me draw more cards, but it really slows me down. Um, or he's just going to try to pick lock, which I think is what he ends up doing. Um, or he could also obviously run out the 3-1 as a flying threat to just start pressuring me. Um, but that obviously takes it away as an interaction piece, which I think is pretty important and probably why he ended up going with pick lock. And I think that's pretty smart.
Yeah.
Watch him not actually do pick lock and me just be misremembering. But yeah,
But it's
this
so
is he's
interesting
clearly
to
tanking on this
spot.
because he recognizes it as one of the like key decisions.
Right. So he pick locks
What were you
here.
gonna say?
Only find slight. No, just was going to point out the exact same thing of like, it's interesting to note. We talk about, how he's making all these decisions quickly. It's also interesting to note the decisions that he takes his time on.
Yeah, yeah. Differentiating between those, like they look so similar, most of
Mm-hmm.
them. You're like, how do you know that that matters and that doesn't, or like that you instantly know what you want to do here, but you feel like this one's really a difficult call. Like, yeah, it's
So pretty
so
brutal
cool.
for you to have drawn a third clone there. That means it's going to be really hard for you to combo win, even if your Garuda hits, you know?
Yeah, although honestly, like maybe it was just I was tired and was not thinking a lot, but I wasn't really thinking about comboing this game. I
Hmm.
had a Karuga down, I had a bunch of ley lines and clones in hand to get rid of Tony's pressure. So my plan here, honestly, I was not really thinking about comboing. I was just thinking I'm gonna develop my mana more than he does and be able to jam a bunch of like I'm going to be able to do at least one double spell turn and continue putting him under pressure with the 5/4 and just get there that way,
Hmm.
which is I think like the B plan of this deck of like Karuga plus other stuff is really viable.
Yeah.
Although this turn was awkward because I know that like there's really nothing I can play that doesn't fizzle to interaction.
Right.
He borrows here. The Spark Double does nothing, but the Impersonator would also do nothing. He can copy a binding, but he doesn't have anything to remove. So
Hmm.
I was basically just trying to run out the worst card in my hand here,
Hmm.
so that like it wouldn't end up punishing me on a later turn.
He
I
decides to
also kind of got punished not being able to Garuda because I named Cavern on Dino the
dino.
previous turn. Glossu pointed that out. We were talking about it on Discord this morning. I'm not sure if that was wrong
Yeah.
by me, but I was trying to, I was going to draw two cards from it. I was not really going for the combo as much as I was just going for value plus pressure this game.
Hmm. And there we see he takes opportunity to draw Drake. Gets lucky hitting a land that can come in untapped to have double disruption up this turn. Not that you often need double disruption against our deck. We're pretty heavily in the single spell life other
Game
than
one, for sure, like double
yeah.
burn spell can really interact with us effectively, and
Hmm.
those are usually dead in your hand anyway, so you have multiple a lot.
Right.
But yeah, I think the double disruption actually did end up being relevant here because I go impersonator this turn and I can pay for it, so he needs to double dispute it
Mm.
just to protect the Drake, which ends up winning the game, really. Because if this Drake isn't on the board, like I have enough threats that I can jam them past his counters, no problem. Especially
Right.
that he's using disputes on this. So my singular goal for these next two turns was just to kill the Drake by whatever means possible.
Right.
I can't race it with Garuda. I'm going to get tons of value by recasting my Karuga as an uncounterable spell. So I am just trying to not die now because Drake is terrifying. And here I'm pretty sure I'll be able to remove it the next turn because he had to double dispute it. And then I'm going to, he only has three disputes and negate doesn't do it. Aether Gust doesn't do it. Like I'm feeling pretty good about being able to remove the Drake, although I am taking a lot of damage for sure. That Treasure Cruise was also
It's a pretty sick draw. And like you can feel like there's part of it that's like, wow, what a lucky draw. It's just like that's what Phoenix does. Like you play against it enough and you just realize like you stop internalizing the top decks because you're like
they only have one of those. They only have two spell pierces. Yes. Yeah, but
they see their whole deck every game. So
right. A lot of Magic is just like you get the iterations and you get the reps in with a certain deck, and you don't exactly understand why they always have a certain thing in a certain spot, but they very likely do. And that's just like what experience shows you. That's basically how I learned like the mulliganing decision stuff with this deck is like my limited player instincts were kicking in and I was just not mulliganing a lot of hands. And I always drew the threat. I always drew what I needed eventually to win the game. And if I didn't, I could draw stuff that delayed them. So like that's the kind of thing we're getting the reps in, just can teach you about the math of a deck in a way that is hard to do when you're just kind of sitting there and analyzing it as like by the numbers.
So here you've got the options of whatever, trying to go for it or copy with Leyline and then shock in Stomping Ground.
One of the reasons I didn't go for it here was just I have a bunch of clones in hand. And so Garuda it's harder to keep re-rolling at least on it. And also like I would need to hit a Carnosaur. And then even then, right, I'm still dead in the air to the Drake. If Carnosaur goes into Quint or goes into clones, like it doesn't really matter because, well, I mean, Quint, but I'm assuming there's ways to counter Quint in Tony's hand. I should, note that. But yeah, like removing the Drake is my number one priority, and I feel much more confident with that off the board here. I actually, completely honest here, totally forgot about the Hall of the Storm Giants. Was not factoring that in the slightest. So I shocked to go down to 7. It turned out that this was the right play anyway, and I kind of got lucky in that, like not looking like an idiot on coverage. Because if he taps out and attacks me with Hall into Karuga, I have a completely open window to just slam a threat and chump with the Karuga. And if he's tapping out, he can't remove the Karuga. I'm also just straight up dead to a second copy of Brazen Borrower here, so there's no reason to play around it because that can disrupt my combo in any number of ways.
And it can just.
So I just assume he doesn't have it.
Yeah. Yes, it puts you dead to Hull, but that doesn't really matter. So another uncounterable Karuga here.
Draw me 3 cards. Feels good.
Yeah.
And I think probably Tony's just thinking about like, does he need to fill his yard with disruptioning, getting it off. Is he trying to pressure me with Borrower? What's the clock look like on that?
Well, does he try to dig into
instead of 6?
Does he try to dig into the second Borrower to bounce?
Or the Aether Gust, maybe?
Yeah, Aether Gust.
Consider first. Sure. There's so many like possible lines here for Phoenix, so many decisions. Whereas I'm just like, what 2 spells am I casting on this turn where I have 9 mana?
Right.
Or am I just casting 1 spell? Am I just casting Garuda? Like, those are the kinds of decisions you make with Quint.
And there's Quint.
So now my brain is locked into like, how many ways does Tony have to beat my combo next turn if I'm casting Quint with enough mana to pay for pierces?
Yeah.
And like I was reading the deck list and it seemed like basically negate and Aether Gust. And I was dead. I was under a clock. And so I just had to jam,
Yeah.
and he had the negate.
Yeah.
At this point, like, if you're seeing all future possibilities or whatever, and you see Tony's hand and you're on coverage, like if you know both players' hands here, it's pretty deterministic as long as Tony plays correctly, and of course he will. He's an excellent player. Like
Mm-hmm.
I'm dead. I'm out. I don't know it yet, but I'm out of the tournament.
Yeah.
And here, yeah, this is just me going through the list, going through, making sure, like, okay, specifically, what do I lose to? Do I have any other lines here? Um, I don't. I'm just dead in the air. So just got to jam. I had the deck list in Arena titled Jam for the tournament.
Yeah. I had joked to Ryan that I was gonna put a bunch of post-it notes around my monitor just saying just jam, because that was, I mean, when I was toying with Amalia, that was one of the reasons I didn't end up trusting myself to play that deck was I like, you can second get, you just play like, you're like, well, you have a single black up, you must have fatal push, so I can't go for the combo. It's like, yeah, but if you're not going for the combo, what are you doing?
You're losing,
And at
equity in
least
the game because
Amalia gives you a sort of
anyway.
like a false sense of, well, I'm just beating down or whatever. Like Quint, at least you're just like, you're not doing anything, buddy.
Yeah,
Just
you're
jam.
hoping to top deck again,
Right. So
which
just
doesn't
jam.
feel good.
Yeah.
But that's
Yeah.
how the deck wins: is it jams, and sometimes they have it, but a lot of the times they don't.
Yeah. And like, I mean, it's just such an incredible showing, Ryan. Like I said, so just total props to you for, I think, pushing me and Glosu to eventually register the deck. Like I said, all three of us live for top 8 going into the last round of Swiss, all winning
Super
ends.
impressive. Yeah,
And
I
then
wanted us to get 2 pallets in there, and we got so close.
yeah, and then you just taking it up to second place and just as close as you possibly can, going to game 3 of 3. It was 3 matches in the finals, going to game 3, just slightly
The
losing.
finals were like just some of my favorite Magic that I've played, not specifically for like my plays, but just like they were really, really good games. I was After losing the finals, I was just like, obviously, I was stoked to have made Worlds and really proud of the tournament I had had. But I
Mhm.
just kept saying to Maura, like, those games were incredible. Like, I was so grateful to have played those games
Yeah.
against Tony.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's the kind of thing that like I think we all just have a craving for deep in our hearts to just play more high level Magic.
Yeah. Well, you get to do it. I'm so stoked to get to cheer you on, and I'm here to help in any way I can for Worlds, and really appreciate you taking the time, twice the time, in fact, to come and chat here. And
It was so fun. I mean, yeah,
yeah,
happy to do more whenever.
awesome, man. All right. Thank you so much, and thank you all for watching. I'll catch you next time.